Welcome to Cord Cutting This Week, episode number 37, the show where I give you my opinion on some of the biggest stories in the world of cord cutting right now. Now, this is my opinion. If you want to learn more about each story, in the show notes down below, I will give you links to each story so you can read more in depth. I also like to know what your opinions are. What do you think of these stories? What do you think I should have added to these stories? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. But let's kind of dive in here. A ton happening. Right off the bat, the FCC just made a major change that will make it much easier for fiber to expand and 5G internet to roll out. This new one is called the One Touch Make Ready rule. Now, this basically says that companies like Google Fiber or like Dish, when they're rolling out fiber to their new cell phone towers, they're building their 5G networks, and other companies that want to roll out fiber and other utilities now have some protection. Recently, it's become very difficult for companies like Google Fiber to roll out their lines across the neighborhood. Existing ISPs, telephone companies, have really worked hard to block their access to telephone poles. And many cities have put rigorous, long, lengthy processes. Now, with this new rule that the FCC has implemented, municipalities, AT&T, Verizon, CenturyLink, all these other companies who have equipment on the poles only get 25 days from the time that, let's say, Google Fiber requests access to the pole to make everything happen. If they don't respond in 25 days, it's assumed to have been approved. So, for instance, Google Fiber, if they want to roll through a town, they'll be able to say, hey, AT&T, you own these poles. We're going to put equipment on this pole, this pole, and this pole. And as long as they don't move any existing equipment or splice into an existing equipment, AT&T basically has 25 days to make everything ready. Even if they don't, Google can still go and add their equipment to that existing pole. AT&T said, well, Google's techs, they're not trained properly. They're probably going to damage our equipment, so we don't want them to come on these poles, which is kind of silly. It's like, hey, we're the only ones capable of doing this equipment, right? So with this deal, though, it's going to make it so much easier for new ISPs to roll out, for new 5G networks to roll out. It's going to dramatically halve the time. Repeatedly, it's talked about how in South Korea, they can wire a town in a fraction of the time that we can do it here in the United States because we have all these companies blocking access to the utility poles. And cities don't want 4 or 5 utility poles right next to each other. They want one pole with multiple lines on it. Well, AT&T is like, well, Google Fiber can go put up their own poles, right? And then the city says, no, we don't want that. So that's kind of what the FCC is trying to block here. This is a kind of one of those news things that doesn't get a lot of attention, but it's probably going to be one of the most impactful news stories to the world of cord cutting going forward, because it really is going to make it possible for third-party ISPs like Google Fiber, C-Spire, and others to run their own lines. It's going to make 5G possible. While 5G is wireless, you still have to get fiber to the towers out there, and this is going to make that possible. The thing about 5G is instead of running fiber to each neighborhood, you just run fiber to the cell phone tower, and then you're all set. So I'm really excited about this. This really is something that's going to help cord cutting a lot. Keep a close eye on this. This is important. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Google Fiber is really excited. For instance, in 4 months of trying, they only got access to 33 poles out of the 44,000 poles they requested. So they requested access to 44,000 poles, and in 4 months of trying, they were only able to add equipment to 33 of them. So that's why I'm so excited about this. I think this is going to be great. Keep an eye on this. Next up, this is a story I've been hearing a lot about. Viacom channels may be coming back to PlayStation and Vue. And maybe even A&E channels like the History Channel and others may be coming. Now, this is kind of one of those things, reading the tea leaves. But a few days ago, on July 31st, when people turned on the PlayStation Vue, suddenly all the Viacom channels were in the guide again, and some of the A&E networks were in the guide again. I had all the logos, everything, but when you clicked on them, nothing actually happened. This is very similar to what happened a few months or a few years ago when some channels were coming to like Sling and other ones. They would sometimes appear briefly. The networks are adding their stuff into the guide before the announcement's ready. They're just kind of entering the logos, they're entering everything. This happened once with Hulu too. I believe it was Showtime. Suddenly Showtime showed up and they were like, oh, no, nothing. Glitch. I think it was a week later, I was like, yep, Showtime is on Hulu. never mind, it wasn't a glitch, it was just a little accident early. So a lot of people are excited, hoping that same thing will happen here. Will it? It's hard to say. Now, one of the things I was not able to confirm by the time I got back in there and tested, it had already been pulled, is was it showing Spike or was it showing Paramount Network? Recently, the Spike Network became the Paramount Network. Now, if View had been showing the Paramount Network and not Spike, that meant somebody went into the View system and updated that logo to the new logo. Did you notice that? Was it showing? If you saw it showing Spike or if you saw it showing Paramount, let me know. I'd love to hear from you because that would give us a good idea. If it's showing Spike, that would likely mean this was a glitch. That, you know, the old data somehow briefly reappeared from back when they had Viacom channels. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep an eye on here is the A&E networks. I don't believe the History Channel was ever on PlayStation Views. Somebody correct me. Am I mistaken? Am I thinking of a different network? I probably should have researched that before I started this. But several of the A&E networks have never been on PlayStation View. If they suddenly appeared on there, that would lead us to believe that it's very possible that that was intentional, that they just weren't ready for it yet. But you can see several of the ones like Logo, Lifetime, Military History Channel, which that one may make me think, didn't the Military History Channel get renamed? Somebody help me there. That's a good clue that this may have been a glitch, but could not have been. So let me know. Keep an eye on this. We're watching it closely, but are they coming? Well, very possible. This is very consistent with behavior of other networks like Sling TV, Hulu, and others who sometimes accidentally have these networks show up and then disappear. The thing to know, though, that just because they show up for a little while doesn't necessarily mean they're coming. Sony has a track record of just doing strange things. Their PR never answers questions, really. They never explain. When something bad happens, very rarely can you get them to say, that was a mistake, that wasn't supposed to happen, and whatever. So just keep that in mind. I wouldn't get too excited, but I would keep my eye on this. But let me know, did you see Spike or did you see Paramount during that brief, what was it, an hour, 2 hours almost, that it was live on PlayStation View? That should tell us a lot about if this was a glitch or if this was a mistake. Let's keep on going. So how fast is cord cutting growing? How fast is streaming growing? Well, we have a new study out, and I'll put all the details down below, but it gives us a really interesting look at the growth of online streaming and the growth of cord cutting. According to this report, the number of hours streamed in 1 year jumped 115%. So looking at the same period, second quarter 2017 versus 2018, streaming hours jumped 115%. The number of times someone played a stream jumped 102%, and peak concurrent streaming jumped 118%. Now this is really important. So not only does this show the growth of streaming, the growth of cord cutting, it also shows one of the reasons why some services are struggling. You know, you have these servers and they can handle X amount of capacity per server, right? So I have a computer, right? This computer can, let's say 1,000 people can stream off this server. For every extra 1,000, I need to add another server, another bank. This is just nice, easy round numbers. Well, when you see 115% growth, that means you need 150% growth of all these server boxes out there. So you can understand why, as we see these huge spikes in growth, companies are rushing to buy servers, expand hosting, get more bandwidth, and deal with the crushing amount of traffic that's happening in the world of cord cutting. Now, we're making a lot of improvements. There's new standards out that means that one server can handle more streams at once. We're making some intelligent changes to the way we manage the back end for the bandwidth and everything. But this is kind of the growth where everything is going. This is what is happening out there in the world of cord cutting that's causing people to say, you know, let me rephrase this. Cable's had 30 years to perfect their system. Cord cutting, since live TV streaming has launched, has only had about 3 years since Sling TV launched. So it's a lot better today than it was 3 years ago, but it's far from perfect. It's going to take a few more years for us to develop this and get it to the same level that cable's at, but we're getting there. PlayStation Vue and Sling TV have done a great job dramatically improving the stability of their service. You always look at a new service when they launch. That's when they have their most issues. Sling TV had issues when they first launched. 3 years later, probably one of the most stable streaming services on the market. PlayStation Vue had issues when they launched. It still has some, but they're a lot better. Look at Hulu. A lot of issues when they launched. Considerably more stable now. For the most part, traditionally, most services are better now than when they launched. Not always the case, but more often than not. So keep a close eye on that growth. We're going to have some more speed bumps going forward in the world of streaming. But don't let that discourage you. Cable, when it first launched for a long time, was highly, highly unreliable. I know a lot of people don't remember this, but in the early 2000s, I want to say 2001 or 2002, right about there, the winter of 2001, 2002, I want to say it was Comcast, or whatever the predecessor was back then, in Western Grand Rapids, Michigan market, their internet went out for a week. Something happened, and it took them a week to replace some hardware. And no one at that company had internet for a week. Can you imagine today saying, you know what, sorry, you're not going to have internet for a week? Nothing really happened. There was no storm, no natural disaster. We just, there's a part we need to get, and we'll get to it. Today, that would be unacceptable. Back in 2001, 2002, I'm pretty sure it was around December, January maybe, somewhere around there. That just is what happened in the Grand Rapids. I remember on the radio, the top of the hour news came on. They're like, hey, restart your Comcast modem. It's now working, but you have to restart your modem. And they were putting it in the paper, on TV, and on the radio news at the top. That doesn't happen today. Outages happen, but the idea of just one day not having internet for a week because something went wrong in a server room somewhere is not something we think about anymore. But back then, 18 years ago, 17 years ago, that is what happened. That just was the reality of streaming at the time. So just keep that in mind, that as these technologies mature, they will become more stable. So just pay attention to that. And fingers crossed, hopefully streaming in a year from now will be just as reliable as it is on cable. And it really is for the most part. You look at YouTube TV, Hulu's become incredibly stable, Sling TV, PlayStation Vue, a majority of these services have become extremely reliable and dependable. So, what do you think? What are your opinions? What's your most stable favorite streaming service? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Questions, comments, let me know. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button. It really helps. Hope you enjoy our new camera. We're slowly investing, trying to get the most out of this. Gonna play around with the position on this a little bit, see if we can get more better angles and everything. So thank you for your support. You make this all possible. I will see you next week, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, for our weekly cord cutting Q&A right here on YouTube.